This is New Central, and I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Blaogun. Now, Dorothy Njemanze's name is one that many people may not be familiar with, but her lawsuit against the Federal Republic of Nigeria is one that many have heard about and discussed. Today, we get into the aftermath of what has now become a historic judgment against the Nigerian state. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dorothy, you and 3 other women were abducted and assaulted sexually, physically, verbally, and unlawfully detained at different times between January 2011 and March 2013 in the hands of the Abuja Environmental Protection Board and other government agencies. Tell us about the first night you were arrested.
That's not an arrest, it was an abduction. I had somebody on my radio program, and she offered to do my makeup because I was going to anchor an event. And so that's how nature planted a human being with me. Otherwise, there would have been no witness to corroborate my story. And I parked behind this bus at the end of my street. And
your own street, so
yes,
you were even on the way home, or almost home.
No, we'd finished the makeup. I was heading for the event I was supposed to anchor, and I needed to see my brother who was at the end of the street, and I parked behind a bus. I got down from the vehicle. She was still sitting in the car, and for me to walk past the bus, I was pulled in, I was plucked off the road by men, and they grabbed me from my breasts and shoved me into the bus where there were crying ladies. While I was feeling offended at their choice of words and their actions, then I realized that, look, I was being packaged for carting away, and I wouldn't have it. So I fought them and came out, and the soldiers who were with them joined and beat me like their fellow man. And my brother was hearing the noise, but he didn't know this time that his family. And at the end of that, I kept telling people that the next one you hear could be your family member.
That's very true. Now, you, along with these women, as you said, you're using the word abducted, but the state said arrested and then accused of being prostitutes because you were found on the streets at night, the streets of Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria. When you hear that this is what are the charges, or this is what was the allegation, how do you feel about that?
I'll start by saying that there are defined processes to know when an arrest is made. And what happened was not an arrest, it was an abduction. The passers-by reacted because everybody knows me. People came and said, I'd not be this person where they speed every time because I'm a racer, I'm a stunt driver. And a lot of people knew me because it's the end of my street, so a lot of people could identify me. And then other people say, I'll not be Dorothy Njemnaze from this because they know me. Others identified me as Dorothy Njemnaze, the actress. And so the environmental people said no, said Ashawawe we sabi very well for this area.
Wow.
And the whole idea is to label you with something that should give you a discriminatory tag so that nobody would be brave enough to speak for you. And then they also use sex crimes to shut the victims up so that you yourself would lose your voice to speak for yourself. I was fondled by my breast the first time during abductions, the second time during abductions, similar things. The third time, a man put his hand into my trousers and in the process pulled out my pubic hairs. And so, graphic as it is, that's the reality. There's so many people. In my case, I was lucky that I didn't get into the bus. You hear different kinds of violations, including different kinds of penetrations in the bus. Yes, in the bus, for people to settle themselves and be let go of.
If you didn't have any money or valuables on you, women were exchanging, were coerced into using sex as a way to...
Exactly. In addition to it, there was a story that was, we were glad to have it publicized, on the largest radio platform in Nigeria. In this case, we had so many people, including married women, who came and said that they had been raped. I know all of the people. I saw all of them. There was a woman who was going to ATM to withdraw money because she needed to take her child, but she needed to see her husband first to get the card or something. It must have been a joint account or so to get the card to go to the ATM, and she was abducted. And she was raped. They took everybody to Rivers Plate Park at the time, and they said everybody get naked, no pants, no bras. And then they started raping everybody. If you had no money to give them, you were taken to ATM to use an ATM, and then they would take your phones from you. These things had been happening. And when I say have been happening, it's because it is still happening. Yeah. This year, we had a repeat of those kind of things. So there's a procedure for arrest. Arrest does not entail physical violation of any human being. Arrest entails that you identify yourself and tell whoever it is you have come for what it is, you know, there's
they're
a
being
procedure.
charged with, what it is that
and
they're
where
being suspected
to,
of being
and where they're going to. That's the procedure for arrest.
Okay.
And we're talking of civilians here, unarmed civilians. Yeah. Women, the targets.
Who do not constitute any form of a threat to these men, to these security agents.
What's with the violence? The eldest person that I have seen, I said at the time that she was 80 years old, and she said that every time when she fry her thing finish for night, they go her house, they go come, they go carry her money finish and everything from her. She was 80 years old. So my question is this. Out of the women folk, how can you look at somebody's physical appearance and determine the traffic between the person's legs? And again, going back to sexual reproductive health and rights, who gave you the audacity to infringe on the human rights of the females by telling them to what extent they should exercise their sexual reproductive health and rights? Because every female has a right to relate with any male she consents to sexual relation with.
Once she has hit the age of consent.
Yes. And children cannot consent to sexual activity. So I'm wondering, how do you first of all look at women and then label all females prostitutes just so that it's a discriminatory tag and everybody who is labeled would want to get themselves out of the trouble? It was criminalization of women. It's not...
In using the terminology, I'm fascinated by why it's also being used. And you keep alluding to something. Isn't this also used because of the kind of society we have? That the moment you say somebody is a prostitute, people who believe themselves to be moralistic individuals or up-thinking, right-thinking citizens will want to sort of separate themselves from someone who has the label of prostitutes attached to them. So it's very easy to call women prostitutes and then people step back.
So I'll tell you, I'll share with you something that really broke my heart. We were in Geneva for the review of Nigeria's implementation of the CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And we were there to analyze how Nigeria has implemented the CEDAW, or domesticated the CEDAW. And that entailed reviewing the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act at the time, because it had been passed. And then when Nigeria was with the implementation of the National Action Plan on the domestication or implementation of the UNSCR 1325 and other related issues. And the Minister of Women Affairs then, the immediate past Minister of Women Affairs, said there, because of the civil societies that represented Nigeria, was the Sex Workers Association. And she felt that it was an insult to her person for people of such caliber to be identified with Nigeria. And she said anybody in Nigeria, that's Aisha Hassan, anybody in Nigeria that identifies as a sex worker or is called a prostitute, in her words, that is not, the person is not entitled to any form of government support or any sort of government anything. And I was sitting there as a human being who had been violated several times, and violated in so many ways. And I was not only violated, I was violated, and I was told that I didn't have access to justice because I couldn't talk about the kinds of violations I'd gone through because they were sexual violations. And so my question is, you sexually violated me, and you expect me to say, oh no, you shook my hand. I shouldn't give the details of the violations I went through.
So that you don't upset other
so that I don't upset anybody's sensibilities. And that is me with my degree of exposure. Now imagine the thousands of people this thing was happening to that are not as exposed as I am. An average of 100 people were violated daily in Abuja. Within 2011, I would say up till date, there have been different modifications that have been made to their style of operation. But for what it's worth, these violations were known to the government. I wrote to every government body there was, the Ministry of Justice, who was the Minister of Justice, who was the Attorney General of the Federation, the National Human Rights Commission initiated initiated, and the National Human Rights Commission initiated
the
investigations.
Panel.
Public Complaints Commission said at the time that we had to be affiliated with an NGO for them to look into that, and that gave birth to the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, because we needed legal platform to sue and be sued. We wrote to the FCT minister. The Minister of Women Affairs office has been very problematic when it comes to this thing. We had a position paper presented, and we were called from the office of the minister, and we were told the content of our position paper is not befitting for the minister's viewing. What did we say? If there's no demand, there won't be supply. If prostitution is your problem and you want to curb prostitution, you should have female detectives that are on the road, and so that when people who come to solicit, the real solicit, they say no, it's a man's world. You cannot think about, you can't frame it that way.
So they weren't ready to do undercover work with female police officers.
It is criminalization of women. I'm entitled to relating with any human being. Freedom of association. I have the right to association. I have freedom of expression. And so these are my rights that are being infringed upon. And we need to let everybody know that irrespective of social class of any Nigerian, no Nigerian's rights must be violated. Okay. Sex workers have a right. If that is, I mean, they will tell you it's my body. I'm not saying anything. I'm not stealing anybody's thing. I don't need to take permission from you to use my body. All we need is consent.
Dorothy, let's get into something else. Now, this has been a journey for you in the past few years. And finally, in 2017, the Community Court of the Economic Community of West African States, that is, of course, of ECOWAS, handed down a judgment against the Nigerian government. It imposed an 18 million naira fine against the federal government. So what were the details of this judgment?
Well, while we were in court, a lot of amazing things happened. We had the Nigerian Council say that during an arrest, an arresting officer has the right to touch anybody wherever the person deems fit. I come before the court saying that you touched me inappropriately. You violated my rights by getting to places that you needed consent to. And you come before the same court to say you have a right to do all of that. And then the court asks a question. If you can't prostitute to yourself, you can't prostitute for yourself, you can't prostitute with yourself. If prostitution is a thing, then it presupposes that there's more than one party to the said thing. So where is the other party? Obviously, from that, the court was able to establish that it was a war against women, and gender-based violence was proven. And to that extent, gender-based violence has been reported to the Nigerian government in multiple ways. Did the Nigerian government do anything to at least give us a right to fair hearing? No, the Nigerian government didn't deem us fit to be given a right to fair hearing. And so, you know, the country was found guilty of not giving us a right to a fair hearing. Yeah. The treatments that was given to us amounted to cruel, inhuman, and torturous treatments. And so the court saw with us along that line. And the court pronounced, for the first time ever, we have a legal document that makes this pronunciation, that a woman out of her house at night is not written enough to label her prostitute. Yeah.
It's not against the law for a Nigerian woman or a woman anywhere to be on the street, minding her business, doing whatever
Whether she's minding her business or not minding her business, the fact that a female is out at night is not reason enough for you to label her prostitute. And so on these grounds, the court saw reason with us that our rights have been, you know, violated, and access to justice for us was a mirage. And so the court awarded, that was the first court that made a pronouncement, you know, in judgment on the Maputo Protocol. And that's landmark. So we got a landmark judgment. And it means that every female in the West African states can latch up to that precedent that has been set as legal framework for access to justice. How did it make us feel? The violations for me started in 2012. The cases I was handling started in between 2010, you know, all the way up there. We approached the ECOWAS court in 2014 and got judgment in 2017. As at 2011, some of the cases that we instituted in the local courts are still going on, and this is 2019. So, had I not thought out of the box, because it was a cartel that we were dealing with, and approached the regional courts to consider strategic litigation, I would still be speaking all the, you know, stories that don't make sense. my person was damaged, the defamations against me were enormous. And even when the ECOWAS court judgment came out, the sensationalism, ECOWAS court awards 80 million naira to 3 prostitutes. The sensationalism, or to 3 women for prostitution, or stuff like that.
So nobody was willing to get into the details to even find out what were the details of the case.
Yes.
Dorothy, let me ask you this. So this is, I want you to answer quickly because there are some areas I want us to get to. Now, this is 2019. The judgment came out from the court in 2017. Has the Nigerian government appealed? Have they reached out to you to say, this is what we want to negotiate the settlement, or we want to give you the terms of how we're going to pay, or give you the timeline or the framework of how the payment's going to be made? What is the latest, given that this is 2 years late?
There's no appellant court for the ECOWAS court,
okay.
So it's a one-stop place. You are either guilty of something or you're not guilty of it. There's a panel of judges that sits to determine the cases, and so you're either seen to be guilty of it or you're not guilty. And it was clear, it was plain with the evidences that Nigeria offended. We've made series of interactions through the Alliances for Africa, especially through Alliances for Africa, to the Office of the Attorney General, begging for the damages to be paid to us. See, I lost everything. They targeted, they threatened to assassinate me. I lost everything on several occasions. Accommodation had been an issue, and having lost everything, people, loved ones also ran away from us because they didn't want to be hurt just in case anything happened to them. I'm in the entertainment space. A lot of people.
Dorothy, let's take a break. No, we'll come back. You'll get to tell it. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
We will continue advocating. Anywhere Nigeria goes to say that they are defending women's rights, we will be there to tell them how they are defending women's rights.